What we'll do is we will start off with an update from Tom Barton, who will give us some feedback on the previous forums and an update on what GIRI are doing now. And then we will start looking at the topic of today, which is the impact of changing supply chains and materials. So from a previous workshop, we identified that this is something we're all quite concerned about. And we'll start off by doing a quick online poll, so get you to provide your input. And that will give us a baseline. It'll basically let us understand the situation we're in now. And then we'll go into a lesson. So basically picking out elements of the GIRI training. And the first thing we'll look at is how can we proactively identify potential errors in advance. And for this today, we're going to talk about the thing called the interfaces triangle. So we can identify interfaces before they cause us problems and work out what we should do about them. We're then going to focus on how we get teams to work, which is going to be particularly relevant with the subject of today, where we might be having some changing supply chains. So we might be working with new people and new organizations. And what are the techniques that we can use to accelerate the maturity so that it's not like working with a new bunch of people. You sort of get to the level you would if you're working with a well-established team. And then we'll have a bit of a dive into communication, what effective communication looks like, and we'll play about with some tools and techniques that can improve communication, which obviously is going to be a key to getting new people, new supply chains working effectively together quickly. And then from that, I will ask all of you to identify any key actions. So basically it's the so what. So you're going to take away from today, and what does that mean for you, for your companies, and what are the key things that we can do to prevent errors that are going to stem from this ever-changing supply chain and materials as we navigate COVID-19. So what I'll do now is I'll hand over to you, Tom, if you're happy, and maybe ask for your update, and I'll share your slides.
Okay, thanks very much, Nick, and welcome all of you. Most of you know what we're doing, but there are some new people here, so I will be going through just very briefly what we found when we did our survey. And our survey showed that the industry as a whole is wasting 21% of its turnover in correcting error. So given that the construction industry in the UK is turning over a bit over 100 billion, that shows that we're wasting about 22 billion pounds a year. So we could probably build or start an HS2 every other year, or something, more hospitals or more schools, doesn't matter. So that's the huge amount of money that we're wasting. So the current GIRI membership is now 55, and we have a number of different types of organisations. We have government advisory bodies, clients, architects, and you can see the rest. I'm not going to name them at the moment because you can see who they are. But so we have 55 members. And our aim is to improve construction productivity and quality by eliminating error. So just looking ahead, given where we are with COVID-19 and all of that, so the world is definitely, well, it's changing, will continue to change. And construction is already changing and will change even more. But one thing's for sure, we need to be more efficient. So we have to continue working on making sure that we get it right. Absolutely fundamental. So we've had a number of sessions already, and a number of things came out of it as to what's happening now. So what are the negatives in terms of what's happening now? So a number of our members have told us that quality management staff are furloughed, incorrect materials are being supplied, future work's already being underpriced. I think we read that every day in one of the construction magazines. And then we've got the perfect GIRI storm. We're so busy trying to keep things going. So have we got things wrong? Are we worrying about getting things right at the moment? Or are we just saying, well, we'll keep going now and we'll come back and fix it later? And then last but by no means least on this list is the impact on people. I mean, it's not just in our industry, but people are facing being furloughed. So if you've been furloughed and then you're brought back, how do you feel compared to the people who are not furloughed? I was having an interesting discussion about that yesterday. So quite serious people issues. And then, of course, there's worse issues for some people if they're made redundant or under threat of redundancy or in consultation. All of these things have an impact on how we all perform. But however, there are some positives. I've certainly heard a lot about companies really working together. People are changing their payment terms and just doing all they can to help each other. And that's a really positive thing. So things are happening more smoothly. People are helping out each other to solve problems. Whether they continue to do that afterwards remains to be seen, but it's good at the moment. Because there are less people on the site or on the sites, the output per person has increased, which is really good, but of course there are less people. Currently, positives, the sort of sense I get is most projects are working at about 75% productivity. And of course, what's happening is there's becoming a greater and greater emphasis on off-site construction, and that will continue in the future. So another positive. And of course, last but by no means least, necessity is the mother of invention. So we're all using a lot of ingenuity, and that's really good. So again, really positive. Next slide, please. So in our last session, we talked about culture, and these are some of the things that came out. We need to have the right culture, so we need to see how good is our internal communication. We need to ensure that we're feeding back to senior management, but are senior management in a position, do they want to hear your feedback? We had a lot of discussion about how procurement decisions affect quality and how is that impact affected? And that's really why we're talking about what we're going to talk today. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Nick. So thank you, Nick.
So what I'll do now is we will look at the next elements of today's session, and these will draw on some of the courses that we run, the GIRI training courses. So for today, the topic is changing supply chains, and let's have a look at the project life cycle, a very simplified project life cycle, and we can think about two different things that might be happening as our supply chains change. It might be that we're working with new people and new organizations, and or it might be that we're working with new materials and new suppliers, new components. And those might happen in any combination. It might be same old people, but new materials. It might be new people, same materials, or new people, new materials. But I think it's worth us just using that as a framework for having a look at how we're going to deal with these potential problems. So what I'd like to ask you to do, please, is to complete a poll. So hopefully you can see the questions there on your screen. So the first questions are related to what's going to happen working with new people and new companies, and what do you think the challenges are going to be? And the second pair of questions relate to using new products and materials. So immediately we can see that for the changing people, so the changing people and organizations, we've got a very big split of opinion. So some people think that this is actually, well, either not going to change at all or could be a positive thing. And other people think, no, this is going to be a serious problem. Whereas when we're looking at materials, pretty much everyone is saying this is a big or a very big problem. So that's interesting that we see these as two different problems. Maybe can I ask someone who thinks that the changing people and companies is going to be a positive thing, could you maybe unmute yourself and put your camera on and just explain why you think there's a real opportunity here, why that could be positive? Hi, Jade.
Hi, Nick. Hiya. So I actually answered this question thinking it would significantly increase risk. However, I also appreciate that there are opportunities when you're expanding the normal members that you're working with in the supply chain to different ways of working. And sort of if we're getting into certain habits of utilising certain members of the supply chain, as good as that is for understanding certain processes and being comfortable with ways of working, we're potentially missing opportunities for introducing sort of new methods or techniques or anything else for that matter. So I think in the short term, there's an increased risk. I do think longer term, it probably presents more opportunities than it does anything else. But I know obviously I have different experiences.
Yeah. Now that's really, really interesting, that concept that actually we're getting a much bigger network and we're getting much more input into our processes. So that's really, really quite interesting. Does anyone either agree with that or disagree with that? Want to comment on that idea that introducing new people into the supply chain, new organizations, is a really good opportunity? Anyone want to make a counter argument to that maybe?
Sorry, I couldn't actually respond to the survey because I don't know. I was struggling with my chat, but I think it's now working. Anyway,
Okay,
I'm Gwen. I'm Osco Holmes. We're off-site builder. Plaster's been a big problem recently, and I think one of the things that this has forced us to do is go out and look for alternative technologies to use. So we've got a new solution, and actually it'll bring us a lot of improvements in terms of cure times and actually the speed and stuff. We can finish things off on site. So that has definitely forced us to deliver something better, which has been good.
Wow. Okay, that's really interesting. So we've heard two cases there that this isn't all doom and gloom. It might be challenging, but it's not necessarily bad. It's some real opportunities. Okay, well, let's have a look at what people said. So what they said on the screen. So most likely consequence of changing people and companies. We've got communication challenges, misunderstanding. I mean, that's clearly a big one. Productivity would slow, lack of understanding of procedures, policies, lack of training, misunderstanding of requirements, potential costs increase, miscommunication again, and having to actually start again and build relationships. Okay, so there's clearly some challenges with that. Let's now look at the second part, which focused on materials and changing materials and components. Yeah, Tom, I can see you've got a comment there. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes, and actually it ties in slightly with what the last speaker actually said, which was that on the one hand, there's a serious risk, and I know it's happening already because I've been given examples where people can't use the materials that they want to use because they're unavailable, and so they are using materials which may not comply. And I can give you a very simple example. A company that uses concrete additives, whoever the supplier is, they can't supply any additives at the moment that are within date. So they are using additives that therefore do not comply, they're out of date. That may or may not have a problem, but the chances are, but there's certainly an increased risk that it's a problem. I do take the point though, that the previous speaker said, is that sometimes you might find a better solution. All I'd say is the obvious one: when you find alternative materials, everybody needs to be absolutely confident that the alternative material really does meet the requirements of that particular issue, whatever it might be.
Great, thank you, Tom. And yeah, and obviously from first-hand experience there, you're seeing this happen for real. So yeah, thank you. Okay, so it sounds like we're all pretty much agreed that changing materials has some significant risks and challenges. And if we just have a look at what people have said, issues in the future. Okay, so if we think about the types of error we focus on, latent defects, this could be coming back to bite us in 10 years time when, we're not going to find out the concrete's the wrong quality immediately. It might be 10, 20, 30 years. Lack of training, availability and cost, supply and demand issues. Yeah. Lack of understanding of the product. Yeah. Okay. And errors built into the completed project. Okay, so a lot of this concern about long-term consequences. So let's go back to the presentation now. And we've had a look at what we think the likely impacts are of change, and we've seen that there's good and bad. But let's have a think about how can we as professionals, and a lot of us involved with quality and preventing error, actually try and proactively prevent these errors from happening. So this is drawing on one of our training courses, the Avoiding Errors at Interface Part 1 course, which is all about how we can get people to collaborate. So in that course, we focus on interfaces because the Get It Right research identified that interfaces are one of the key root causes of errors. Now, normally when you have a conversation with a group of built environment professionals about interfaces, the first thing that comes up is physical interfaces. So, an interface between a pipe and a beam, or a bit of plasterboard and the thing behind it. So we understand that idea of the physical interfaces, and we have to spot them, and we know that we have to manage them. But actually, what we always stress is that if you can see an interface, look for all the associated interface. And what we mean by that is we can think of a triangle. So we can think of space being physical interfaces where something bangs into another, but we've also always got people, so people or organizations, and we've got a time or sequencing interface. So if we know that there's a physical interface, we should ask ourselves, actually, what are the people, what are the organizational interfaces that go with that? Is it a different installer doing part A and part B? And also, there's always going to be a sequencing interface. And it doesn't matter which of those types of interface we spot first. If we know there's a contractual interface, we can then work backwards and go, okay, we know we've got a contractual interface. What are the associated physical interfaces and timing or sequencing interfaces? So that just gives us a framework to help us start to spot interfaces. And if we can't spot them, we're very unlikely to be able to manage them and prevent the errors from happening. Now, from the fact that we've got changing supply chains, what that would suggest to me is that the interfaces that maybe we are used to dealing with might change. So it could be that the boundaries between what different contractors do change, or the interface, if we're changing materials or components, the interface where those components meet other components are likely to change. So this really is just our alarm bells. What should we be thinking about and worrying about? So the next thing I want to look at is actually, how do we get our teams to work? And it came out in the poll that everyone was pretty much agreed that trying to get new teams to work together is going to be a challenge. So let's have a look at something that's nothing to do with our work, but I'm going to ask all of you some questions, and could you please answer the questions in the chat box? So just type your answers into the chat box and we'll see what we get. So how do you communicate the following information? So I can imagine you all there now, fingers poised, ready to go, ready to type, race to see who's got the fastest fingers. So first question, you're due to pick up your kids from school, but your train is delayed. You need to let your partner know that you're going to be late so that they can pick them up instead. Okay, we've got mobile phone, mobile phone, text or phone call. So we've got WhatsApp. So most people are phone. I think pretty much everyone is phone. Okay, so let's go on for the next question. You want to wish an elderly relative happy birthday. What would you do? Okay, we've got send flowers. Gwen, I think you're winning there. FaceTime, Jason. Gwen's definitely beating you in the compassion stakes, I think. We've got a phone call. Yeah, card, visit, send card or call card, birthday card. Okay, so we can see that we have a range of different options there. Can I maybe ask one of you to comment on that? So who said, so Nicola, maybe can you just explain, how did you make that decision? How did you decide to do a call or a card? Can you just explain what went through your head?
Because all my elderly relatives live down south and I live in the north, so yeah, geographically it makes more sense to send something or ring them up. Okay, great. So you had a model, you understood where they were, how they relate to you, and you chose your answer. Okay, brilliant, thank you. Oops, sorry, flick through another. So let's have a look at another question then. So fingers on the buzzers again. And we've got wishing your best mate a happy birthday. So same message, happy birthday. How do you communicate that one? Text. Text or call, meet up or text, FaceTime, WhatsApp, phone, WhatsApp. Okay, so we got a whole different bunch of answers there to the previous question. Let's have a look at the next one. You want to tell your bank to stop paying direct debits to an old phone company that are still taking money. So we've got email, app, email, online app, email and letter, website message, chat. Okay, so we have got a whole bunch of different answers to those 4 questions that are communicate a simple message to someone. So what you've all done there is instantaneously you have selected a means of communication depending on the nature of the message, the urgency of the message, the communication preferences of the recipient, and whether or not you need confirmation that it's been received. So those things you did expertly and instantaneously
tailored to any of those messages. So that suggests to me that human beings are pretty blooming good at communicating when we choose to or when we need to. Now, what I'd like to ask is, how does that compare to the way we communicate within a project team and across different companies?
My name is Ronan Hunt, and I like to be known as Ronan.
Jerry's usual, or Jez, something like that, yep.
Hi, I'm Amy Green.
I'm Gary Hughes. I like to be known as Gary.
Hi, my name is Harendran Harry Sathanandan. I prefer to be known as Harry.
My name is Clara Swabuta.
My name is Mark Haywood, and most people just call me Mark.
I'm a structural engineer.
My role is technical coordinator.
I'm a senior commercial manager.
A civil engineer.
Assistant engineer.
I'm responsible for technical design coordination.
Flood risk management, drainage design and general site coordination.
Day-to-day commercial management of a phase or an element of the project.
Looking after all the supervisors that's under me, making sure they've got the work ahead of them, and generally being a good agony aunt, I should say.
My expertise is within structural engineering.
Materials, analysis, sketching, drawings.
25 years within civil engineering and 9 years military engineering before that.
Really technical detailing.
A rounded knowledge of quality management, information management and contracts.
Things that annoy me on projects are out of the blue requests and changes with no early warnings.
I don't like when I get an email starting with gents.
Communications in the wrong form.
If you can look up the information without asking me, that is better. Otherwise I get about 1 million emails a day saying, what colour are you doing this?
I don't like computers, hate emails.
Being called straight after being emailed without giving me the opportunity to address what's being asked.
When experienced people take the time to explain complex issues or even simple things that you do not know.
Well presented and well-rounded documents and forms of communication.
Good early chat on different issues that can come up on the project.
I like people that's on the same wavelength as me, where I can sit down and say we talk about the work, but we have a little bit of a banter with it.
Talking to people on site and talking to people who know their trade is always, I think, the best way to go about sorting out issues.
For general communications, can you drop me an email just for typical day-to-day things?
Emails, as I check them very frequently, and I like to have a conversation trail which I can refer to.
Generally quite reluctant to communicate via email unless it's something of a contractual nature or needs to be sent by email, so generally on the phone.
Always best to give me a call first. We can discuss what needs to be discussed.
When I'm not at a meeting, I'm generally sat at my desk doing design work, so I'm pretty much generally contactable on the office phone.
So hello everyone, I'm back again, so hopefully you can see me now, not the video. What I might ask you to do is if you can all just turn your cameras back on for a second, and we'll have a quick explore of what are the nuances you've ever seen in terms of communication. So if you can think from your experience, what are the strangest or oddest ways that you have found to be effective for communicating with different people? It might. Okay, WhatsApp group between site and office. Interesting. So Jade, maybe if you can comment on that. Is that something that's recognised, or is that completely informal, below the radar type of communication?
I mean, it's a bit of both. This is from I'm no longer working on site, but I was working for Skanska a few years back, and one of the things that we found quite helpful between different works packages was to have an easier way of just communicating. So we were also split in terms of the site team, so you'd have to walk quite a distance between the different areas. It obviously wasn't formal, but it was widely known by most of the people on the project that was used. So if you wanted to get on that group, then you just asked the admin and then you got added onto a particular group. So it was sort of semi-formalized in that sense, but it was just quicker and easier. Most people have access to it, could take photos, which I know a lot of people will use on-site apps for if you're doing things like inspections, which is fine. But in terms of general comms and understanding what's going on, it was relatively effective. But it was a while ago now, it was a few years back, so I don't know if there's any changes since.
Brilliant. And I can see, Alan, you've sort of made a similar comment there. Could you expand on what you've said, Alan?
So certainly, yes. The first part of that is tongue in cheek, but yes, chopping up an A0 drawing into A4 portions and putting it through a fax machine was effectively the fastest means of getting the information to the individuals that had required it. Post wouldn't have worked. Email didn't exist to be able to take that file size. So there was no other means of getting it there, and it's actually faster than a bike. So it was the fastest means of communicating. WhatsApp with a photo now, backed up perhaps by a phone call, is also then the most expedient form of communication.
Okay, really interesting. What I'll do, I'll go back into the, there's some really interesting comments. We haven't got time to read them all out, but please do read those comments, because I find it amazing to see how adaptive people can be and how adapting our communication can be really powerful. One of the things that we focus on in the training is how can we accelerate the maturity of project teams. So if you have a bunch of people you've worked with for many years, you know these nuances about them. But when you have a new project team, you probably exchange business cards or maybe just the address blocks at the bottom of your emails. And that will tell you a few basic things. It'll tell you your name, your phone number, maybe a job title, and that's about it. So what GIRI talk about is this thing called a personality card. So it's basically a business card on steroids. So it doesn't just say, this is my name, this is my phone number. It actually gives you information that makes you able to tailor your communication. So it might be things like, actually, this is what annoys me. Actually, this is what I like. You know, suddenly you know something about that person. And then you can actually provide information on how to communicate with them in a general setting. You know, for general communication, I prefer this. If it's urgent, do this. So let's have a look at some completed examples of a personality card. So we've got one here, William Benson. So that's the name on his business card is William, but he actually likes to be called Billy. So that's useful information already. It's already personal. Things that annoy him. I get really wound up by overly complex notes on drawings, which have important detail buried amongst waffle. I receive hundreds of emails every day, so I hate it when several important issues are dealt with in the same email. I start work early, so I get annoyed when people want urgent information after 4:30 p.m. So already, if we want to communicate with Billy, we've got an idea, right? I'm going to pick up the phone. I'm not going to bury it in a meeting note, and I'm probably going to try and call him early in the day. Things I like, talking face to face, or at least on the phone, being asked for my opinion, as often I know more about the realities of what's happening on site than anyone else. So we know that he's going to be pleased to have a phone call. He's going to be pleased and happy to offer a contribution. So we already know how best to communicate with Billy, which, if we think about it, is exactly the same thought process we were going through with those earlier questions about would you choose to send a card or make a phone call or go round and visit someone. So we're employing this innate communication ability, but we're bringing it into our work setting. And we already know that this improving our communication is going to be one of the key tools in reducing error. So really powerful technique. Let's have a look at one more little example here. So we've got Alice. She is a design manager responsible for structural engineering design. Things that annoy her: every query from site being urgent, even when they had the design for several months, being expected to make design amendments in a few hours when they often require significant rework, being asked questions face to face, not on a formal RFI. Okay, so now if we're communicating from site to Alice, we already know that, oh, actually, she'd rather I'd stick it in an email or on the formal form rather than a phone call. So the opposite to Billy. So we're able to tailor our communication depending on who we're communicating with. So I won't go through that anymore, but what I'll do is ask you please to go back to the chat box. And I'm aware that every company has different systems, but just to try and think in the chat box, how could you employ those principles of the personality card, or maybe how you do employ them already, within your project teams to accelerate the maturity of your project teams after you restart from COVID? Steve, can you maybe unmute and put your video on and talk about that idea of a team matrix?
Yeah, I just thought if you've got a number of people in the team, so you might be communicating to more than one. So you might be communicating to 3 people, and if you put it in the matrix, you can see the preference, or if you've got to use 3 different channels for 3 different people, you know, it's not, sort of comparing preferences.
So that's a really good point, isn't it? Because actually what we're talking about takes work. you know, if you're saying I've got a message to give to 3 people, am I going to send it 3 different ways? And that, you know, that rapidly becomes untenable. But that's a great idea, that matrix. And Jason, I see you've talked about the video chats. Maybe you can comment on how you see those being part of future life.
Well, yeah, we've been talking a lot about, you know, when's the right time to go back to the office, and the feedback generally is people, perhaps from a mental health point of view, need to get that circulation back in an office, but from a productivity point of view, want to carry on the web chats. So if there's a way of blending the two, but keeping this going so that you're continuing to reach out, I think would be the right thing to do.
Really interesting. Okay, so and that sounds like another case where we've been thrown into this situation that we maybe didn't want, but we can see some real benefits of it that maybe we weren't expecting. So, okay, great. And Helena, you, so Helena and Tom both made sort of comparable comments in terms of things you can talk about. So, Helena, what's your thought behind your comment about asking people about lockdown?
I think it's just a question of you know, we've all been forced to find out more about other people because we've been looking into their houses, and we've, you know, they've been working around their other commitments and so on. And it's something that I think you, when you're working with people, you might be, it might come up in conversation, but it's not something that you, if you're naturally not a chatty person, you might not get into that conversation. But it does add another dimension to colleagues that I think is important. It gives you a better understanding of what issues they're facing.
And it's interesting that you bring that up, because that is the stuff that I think happens by accident often, isn't it? It's the conversations, you know, at the coffee machine, or the conversations in the canteen, or you know, when you're waiting to turn up on site. And actually, we might not be having those even when we're in the office. We're at 2 meters apart. So we've suddenly got a massive hole in that human interaction. So yeah, that might be something we really consciously need to fill, is how do we make sure that we create that? And Tom, you've there said about find out which football team they support, which I think is a yeah, Jason's I think you're agreeing with that. Yeah. And yeah, Alan, you've said find out what positives from working at home they can now bring into the site or office. Yeah, great, thank you. Okay, so it sounds like we've got quite a clear picture there of techniques we can use to try and accelerate that maturity of communication. So what I'd like to do in this final part of the lesson is have a look at communication in the round. So, you know, actual, almost a textbook definition of communication. So when we think about communication, when you look it up in a management textbook, it talks about a 6-step process. So I'll just have a look at those steps now. So the first thing is that you have someone who needs to, Helena, I think your microphone's still on. If I could just ask you to put it off a second. Is that all right? So the first thing is that the sender has to encode a message. So that might be you're writing in your card, it might be that you are speaking into a phone, it might be that you're typing, it might be you're drawing, but you have to choose a method of encoding. We then have to transmit the message. So we've already heard about transmitting it by fax, we've heard about transmitting it by WhatsApp, you know, so there's myriad ways we might do that. But then crucially, it has to be decoded by the receiver. So they have to understand it. If I sent a message in Greek, the chances are not many people on this call would be able to understand it. I can't speak Greek, so it's not going to happen. But that's the first part. So we have got a message to someone, and we can see that there are 3 separate steps to get the message there. But now's the really important bit. We need to get some feedback. So the receiver needs to encode their message. They need to transmit their message, and that then needs to be decoded by the person who sent the original message. Now, what I would suggest, and I'll be interested to hear your thoughts, is that the first bits of that we do a lot. We encode messages and we transmit them. We type stuff into emails and press send. We complete drawings and put them into document transfer systems. That front end we do an awful lot. What I'd question is whether we do enough of this second part, getting feedback. Have we had confirmation that our message has been received and understood correctly? We knew that when our young kids were going to be left at the school gate, we chose a means of communication that meant we were absolutely sure that someone had got that message and understood it and was going to do the thing we needed them to do. And we also know that when we needed our bank to do something, we chose a method of communication and we got some confirmation that it had been actioned. But we need to think very carefully, particularly as we're working with new teams and new supply chain, how are we going to close out that loop? And there are a couple of techniques we can use. So one is what we call back briefing. So that's getting the receiver of the message to actually, in their own words or in their own way, communicate back to the sender, this is what I've understood. This is what I'm now going to do. And that's a great way of confirming if the message has been understood. And an even quicker way is the use of open questions. And so an open question, hopefully I'm teaching you all to suck eggs here, is just a question that cannot be answered with a yes or a no. So I'm going to now play a few very short video clips of people asking questions. And could I ask you all, please, just to comment in the chat box again, so using that chat box, what do you think about the question? Is the question open or closed? And what might be a better way of asking that question? What's going to be the result of that question? So please put your comments in the chat box and I'll be interested to see what you think. So let's have a look at the first question.
Have you got all the information you need now?
Okay, so let's play that one again and I'll see what you think of that question.
Have you got all the information you need now?
Comment on that, on your answer, Jade?
Yeah, I mean, immediately the question is, well, you know, do you have, so it's a yes or no question, but presumably if the answer is no, you would expect to add more detail or colour to that response, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
So it could be perceived as an open question in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. And thank you. So the key thing here is that you have given the person answering the opportunity to give a one-word answer. And also, if someone isn't sure, and bearing in mind this chap, he's a senior director on a massive site, people are going to just say, oh, yes. Whereas there might be other ways of asking a comparable question. So let's have a look. Let's have a look at another example.
What are the two biggest concerns about the information you need?
Okay, let's have some comments on that question. What do you think about that question?
What are the two biggest concerns about the information you need?
Julie, yeah, you've said what if they have more than two? Yeah, good. Jason, maybe can you expand on your answer?
Yeah, sorry, no, just that by saying that, what two concerns have you got? You're giving them the opportunity to almost create concerns that they might not have had.
Yeah, yeah. Anyone else want to comment on that? Is that a good thing, a bad thing, indifferent? Do you have an opinion on it, or?
Yeah, I'll put hi Nick.
Hi Eddie.
I'll put open, which is good, but sounds scripted because you could have more than two. You know, so it's why two? That's a very random number if I look at it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I quite like the fact that he says two because it sort of catches you a bit off guard. You're like, oh, I'm actually going to think about this now.
Oh yeah, you are right. He definitely that will definitely make me think, and that would definitely catch me off guard. So I'd get my attention. So I think that's what he's trying to deliver there.
Okay, maybe Irma, can I ask you to comment on your answer there? And if you can unmute and put your camera on, that'd be great, so we can all see and hear you.
Hi, I'm here. Probably if this is someone senior, maybe a supervisor, maybe a boss, and you want to just be able to say, yes, I understand, or yes, or no, I don't understand. In fact, you probably say, yes, of course, I understand. Whereas actually this person is saying to you, you know, it's okay, not, so this is what it says to me. You know, if you've got a couple of things, it's okay to understand that you don't know everything, but let's just go over it. So I think it's inviting a conversation, and I think you'd be much more open to say, yeah, well, I'm not too sure about that. Can you explain that again? So I would prefer this second method rather than the first one.
Now that's really interesting, because actually what I was hearing you say there is it's not just getting a useful answer to the question he's asking, it's actually changing the culture on that site.
He's given me permission not to know everything.
Yeah. Okay. And if we think back, those of you who are on last week's forum that was looking at culture and how do we create a positive culture. So what Irma was just saying is that actually this is changing the culture on that site. It's changing the way people think they need to relate to one another. So it could be that we're actually having a disproportionate positive impact just by our careful choice of questions. So let's use the chat box again. I'll play a couple more, and just type in what you think. Well, let's just do the open closed and just see if you can identify, is this an open or closed question?
You know, the finish on this bit is really important, don't you?
So John Armitt comes up to you, says that.
You know, the finish on this bit is really important, don't you?
Okay, so let's have a look at another question.
What's the finish on these elements? What's the finish on these elements?
Okay, so suddenly we've got open. So if someone doesn't understand something, or if someone's going to make an error, you'll find out, because they'll tell you, they'll either say, I don't know, or they'll tell you the wrong thing. So straight away, you've been able to spot that error. Let's have a look at one more.
Any problems?
Okay, how many times do you hear that?
Any problems?
What do you think of that question? And we hear that question all the time, don't we? When senior people walk around site, that is the question that is used as a demonstration of, oh, I want to know what's going on. But we've just identified it isn't actually doing that, is it? It's just inviting people to say no, or occasionally you'll have someone who moans. So let's have a look at a different one. One more, final one.
Can you tell me what you've understood?
Okay, what do we think about that one? That's a bit nuanced. So any
Can you tell me what you've understood?
So I think that is definitely intended as an open question, isn't it? I mean, technically you could just say no, but that's not the answer she's expecting, is it? So she is encouraging feedback. What we can do is we can look at the questions that we regularly ask, and a really good discipline on sites or anywhere within our supply chain or the projects is to just sanity check the questions that either we hear or we're asking. So are we going to have problems with this detail? A better way of asking that might be, how is this going to work? So subtly different, but much more powerful. Have you got all the information you need now? Might be better to say, actually, what information do you still need? Are you going to get this completed by a deadline? A classic. You turn up on site and say to a subby, you're going to get this done by the deadline? I'd hazard a guess that most of them will say yes. Actually, if you reword that to how long will this take to do it correctly, suddenly you're inviting people to be honest. And the key things in here are these magic words, the when, where, who, what, why, how. And on site, whether it's questions you're asking or whether it's questions that you hear other people asking, I always say it's really important to have an alarm bell. And whenever someone gives a yes or no answer, we want this automatic alarm bell to go off. And that alarm bell is saying, that isn't verifying that this is error-free. You know, that is not checking that this is correct. That's just conversation. And the pitfall is if we think that yes/no questions are part of our drive to prevent error, then we're getting it wrong. We should be weeding out yes/no questions in order to get rid of the errors in the longer run. So what we've considered today, we've looked at how we can identify interfaces in terms of space, time and people. We've looked at how we can personalize our communication, and we've had a look at open questions and the real power of avoiding yes/no answers so that we can understand what's really going on and spot these errors. So I think if we could all unmute ourselves again, or everyone type into the chat box, what do you think is the one key action that could be implemented on your projects that would have a beneficial impact on preventing errors as we start to deal with new supply chains and new materials? If there's one thing, what would you What would you like to see? What would you, Steve, do you want to comment on that? You've spoken about the interfaces beyond the physical.
I think when we talk about interfaces, then normally, as you say, the physical design interfaces, and it's thinking back beyond that as to who creates what and what time relates to it, which is something I've gleaned from today that perhaps I knew, but I hadn't really considered. So that was good.
Great. Good. Yeah, that's interesting. Anyone else? Gwen, maybe can you expand on that, the group review discussion?
I think with the technology we've now got, we're all using it today, there's opportunity to get more people involved in things more quickly. So, you know, where there is a change and we are seeing a lot of it out on site, there's that ability to say, hang on a minute, let's just have everybody together. And actually, while we're all at home, certainly in our case anyway, people are more available because they're not traveling as much. So why not get people involved, more people involved?
Great. Okay. And that sounds like a fairly significant shift in the way we work, where it used to be that we thought of meetings as they take an hour, you spend 2 hours traveling to it, and it blacks out half a day for a meeting. Whereas actually you're saying, well, why don't we have a 5-minute meeting where we all just click onto our phones and we're there? And yeah, so it might be that the way we communicate could completely change. So, and Nicola, the personality card, maybe could you expand on that and how you'd see that working?
Yeah, I think it was points we made before about how we're all getting to know each other a bit better now. Actually, we're working more remotely, or people have been on furlough. I know I work for a remote team, so I'm based in the north, but most of my team are based down south. So it's been really nice to actually get to know each other. But actually, this might be really helpful to make sure we're not annoying them as well. So if we're always sending each other's emails previously, it might be a way of figuring out the best way to communicate with them.
Brilliant. Okay. Oh, that's really great. Well, I think we'll wrap up there. So maybe Tom, if I can hand back to you, and you can wrap us up.
Well, thanks, Nick, and thanks to everybody for contributing so much to the discussion today. First of all, for those of you who don't know, the training materials and the videos that we've used today are from our general suite of training that we're now offering. I thought the interesting discussions today was about, you know, how do we deal with changing teams? And of course, we have said because of COVID, but of course, teams are always changing. So some of the lessons that we've learned today and some of the things we talked about, I think talking about just now, we could use the techniques that we've all got better at using to communicate better. I think that's an interesting point. So hopefully we'll go on doing that thereafter. I think the key point is that I've got a saying that a problem known about is no longer a problem. And I think to a large extent what we've been talking about today is we've all identified it as a problem, and we've all actually come up with some quite interesting solutions to that problem. So I think the hope that I have is that once we get out of the specific issues that are happening at the moment because of COVID, we actually continue with some of the solutions that we've started to adopt. So I hope we then just don't throw them all in the bin and go back to our old ways. I think we talked a lot about communication, personal experience. The better you get to know people, whether they're your own organization or part of the rest of the organization, the more chance you have of actually doing the thing well, because you can communicate. And I did write down in the thing, what football team do you support? I don't actually support any football team, but that's not the point. The point is, if you understand people and what makes them tick, you've got more chance of when there are issues or whatever they might be, you've got a much better chance of solving them. So I think the key message from this is everything we've talked about today, all fantastic stuff, all relevant because of what's happening with COVID and getting out of lockdown, but actually it's all relevant for everything we should go on doing in the future. So thanks very much for listening. Thanks for your time. I hope you found it useful. We've got one more forum of this series, I think on the 2nd of July. So with that, thanks very much, and I hope you have a good evening. Goodbye.